Thank you. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Documentation Cluster March meeting. Today we have Neil and Fiona. They're going to talk to us today about a project that they've been working on called Data2Paper. We will be sending out an email soon asking for suggestions and what you're working on to plan for the ESIP summer meeting. That's going to be taking place in Indiana this July. So look forward to that, and please do let us know what you've been working on and what you would like to talk about. With no further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Neil. Thank you, Neil and Fiona, for coming today and sharing your work with us.
Okay, can everybody hear me? Is my microphone on now?
Sounds good.
Okay, great, thanks. Okay, I'm going to give you a little bit of background to the project and just say how we got to where we are. And then I want to express very much that this is a prototype, and we're hoping to move forward into production later this year. And at that point, we'll be looking for communities who are interested in essentially testing the product for us and giving us their feedback. So that's just to set the scene and tell you where we are. So I'm going to give you a bit of background, and then I'm going to give you a sort of canned demo of the prototype where I'm actually going to show off the software, but not the entire workflow, because that involves somebody else's repository and another journal, and I don't have them to hand right now. The original the project that started it off was called Giving Researchers Credit for Their Data, and it was funded by the JISC in the UK with a series of really quite small grants, but very dynamically allocated. And the original partnership was between me and the Bodleian Libraries, a chap called Thomas Ingram from F1000 Research, and they've been good partners there at the journal end of things. As a library, we provide the repository end of things. And then Fiona Murphy, who had, coincidentally, we met her during a sort of brainstorming session before the project and discovered she'd actually done some of the preliminary research that we needed for the project. And she came on board as a project manager. Let me just go to the next slide. Thank you. So the concept really was to provide a carrot for people depositing data in data repositories. The idea was to basically put a button on the data repository item, which you've just submitted, called Submit Data Paper. So I'll do a little bit of a digression and just discuss what a data paper is. Really, they differ from journal papers in that they are very strongly data focused, and really they are primarily interested in methodological capture. So it's really targeting the sort of the notional crisis in reproducibility we have in scientific data, where the traditional journal publication does not contain enough information to actually replicate the data or the findings properly. So a data paper is designed to bridge that, where you're not presenting necessarily your conclusions, but the methodology of how you created that data set and possibly how you've analyzed it, what you've done there. So the idea is to add a button to simplify creating or depositing a data paper or submitting one to a journal. So if we have this button on a repository and it does what it says on the tin effectively, then the researcher gets effectively another publication citation opportunity in the form of the data paper. By putting it in the repository, they get preservation of the data. And one thing that we discovered is a major benefit of it is the researcher gets to avoid the publisher's submission system. The publisher gets more data paper submissions or faster data paper submissions, better metadata quality. I'll get into why that should be so a little bit later, and link referrals from the data repositories to their data paper, because we've automated that link. Repositories in turn get more data deposits, better metadata quality, and link referrals from publishers. So that's about benefits going both ways there. and overall the funders get more reuse, more impact out of the money they've spent, and ultimately better reproducibility of the science. So in general, that looks like a win-win situation. So based on that original idea, we have a simple schematic. At the top we have a data repository. You press a button. We're going to discuss technical details which you don't need to worry about, but the essential thing is a package is sent to a helper app that sits in the cloud, and importantly contains two things: information related to a DataCite DOI that relates to the data set in question, and the ORCID of the submitter. And in the helper app, we can then use the DOI and the ORCID to retrieve metadata about the submitter and the data set itself. And because these are well-defined standards, we have a lump of well-structured metadata. And what Fiona had done in analysis is looked at the workflows for a number of data paper publishers and established that actually between the DataCite DOI metadata and the ORCID metadata, we have most of the information to fill in a publisher submission system already there. So in the helper app, it should simply be a matter of selecting the journal we wish to publish, downloading the template if you want, adding the paper text into that, selecting your co-authors from ORCID if you don't have that information already, and agreeing to the publisher's terms and conditions. And then that is bundled up into another package, which is then pushed into the publisher's submission system. That effectively means that it appears within the publisher's publishing queue without you having to actually interact with the submission system. And it also means in the helper app you have a standard way of interacting with different journals rather than having to deal with different submission systems. And then ideally at the end point of that, when the paper is published, it has a DOI, but it also contains references to the dataset DOI. And in that case, something like Crossref will then pick up the relationship between those DOIs, and we can effectively close the circle. So that was the theory when we started the project. So phase one, we went away and they said, go and do a feasibility study, work out, is this sensible? So first of all, we had the publisher workflow analysis, very usefully done already for us by Fiona. So you can find that there. And from that, we developed a strawman specification for the helper app and API. This is what we think it needs to do. And we took advantage to the fact that at the moment, most data papers, probably 90% or so, and the related data sets are actually open. So since this is a new publishing area, openness is very much sort of part of a modus operandi. So it makes our life a lot easier. We don't have to paywalls and access control to the same extent. So what we did is we put together a questionnaire for repositories of publishers where we presented the specification, and then basically asked them to confirm whether those requirements made sense to them from both ends of the workflow, and what sort of interest they would have in doing that. And what came back essentially was of the, I can't remember the precise statistics, again there's a link there on the slide, you can go and have a look at the results of that survey, but there was overwhelmingly positive feedback. In general, most of the people said, yes, we want to do that. There are a few people who are neutral, and most of the time their argument was, yes, but our systems are nothing like well enough to develop to do that sort of automation. And we also got offers of collaboration just on the basis of asking that question. So that was very positive. So in phase two, we then went away to develop a proof of concept and develop that. Just gave us a little bit more money. We developed a more detailed API spec and put that up on GitHub and published that. And then developed a prototype helper app, which at that point was called Data2Paper Companion. Now the whole thing has been renamed as Data2Paper as being something more snappy. And I won't go into the technical details of the platform we use for that, but in general, if you've got the text waiting to be submitted, we can get from the repository to the publisher in under 10 minutes. We did quite a lot of community building, talking to various people, linking into various people who come back positively in the initial phases, and we had a lot more collaboration offers than we could actually handle, so we had to choose our partners carefully, given that we already had a repository and a publisher to work with. So phase three then, having basically shown off the demonstration, and you're going to see essentially an updated version of that prototype. We started looking at the business case. So we wanted to look at indications of the time that this app would save scholars, to quantify their benefits, and get some idea of the efficiency gains. And we were looking to save, you know, an hour per submission or something like that. I'm going to let you read those really for yourselves, but when we did just a straw look around on how people dealt with journal submission systems and how people felt actually submitting things into journals, we really discovered that actually avoiding the submission system was much more of a benefit than we originally anticipated. And not only that, we discovered that a lot of publishers fully realized that this was a major hindrance in their workflow. Excuse me a moment, I've just got to go and deal with an errant cat. Sorry, that was the joys of giving a presentation from home. Just got interrupted by my cat. So we discovered that a lot of people were, you know, really didn't like dealing with the journals, and a lot of journals realized that that was a serious barrier to people wanting to publish more than they absolutely had to. So that was a very interesting finding and actually became one of the strongest points of the submission. The other thing we discovered that actually without using a data repository, a lot of journals would then try and have it submitted as supplemental data, and that caused significant problems in that submission systems really could not cope with significant volumes of supplemental data. So people were having to deposit stuff in data repositories anyway. By leveraging that and using it to make the whole submission system more fluid and more automatic, we actually avoided these issues that we were seeing with traditional submission systems. So from that point, we then really wanted to consolidate that. So we now have data2paper.org. We want to start to demonstrate real papers published using the workflow. We did some work with another group that the JISC funded, looking at effectively paper-led deposits, pushing backwards into repositories. But as we saw, there are issues with actually trying to take that route. So only in a few select cases does that workflow work. And we started to look at how we turn this into a service, make this thing sustainable, and this is pretty much the stage we're at now. We put together a steering committee with representatives from people like ORCID and Figshare, but also Elsevier, but on the same time with F1000 we've got open journals as well, so we wanted to look at all the possible places. And to be honest, the part of Elsevier we're talking to are open journals as well. Publish the API spec as a formal specification and really treat the code as a reference implementation. And then started in discussions with ORCID. Are your data sets going to appear in ORCID as well as your data papers? As we're starting to take broader definitions of impact, certainly in the UK, as far as the assessment of academic endeavors goes, then starting to keep track of your published data sets actually becomes an important part of your scholarly record. So now we're in a little bit of a gap. We've got some more funding grants in. Microsoft Research has given us free hosting for at least another year. And one of the other things is we're starting to look with integration with other repositories besides the Fedora repository that we developed code for at Oxford. And one of the ways we tried to simplify that is having a look at what was needed to be done is we actually developed the Publish My Data Paper button as a pure JavaScript client, so you can very easily add it to any web-based repository without actually having to change much of the repository underlying code. So we're starting to look at working for other people. We're starting to develop a roadmap for the service transition, which we hope to do this year. We're actually hosting the cloud app in the on Azure. It doesn't have to be Azure, but they're giving us the space for free. So the cloud app doesn't actually store any papers. All it does is store your metadata and your paper as it is in transit between the repository and the publisher. Once your paper's been published, we can effectively delete that record. In practice, we hold on to it in the in the cloud app, so that if your paper is rejected, you can actually easily submit it to another journal if they're linked into the system. And in the long future, we're starting to look at the possibility of using it for not open data. But more interesting, certainly from the UK point of view, is there's now a drive to have people submit preprints to repositories in order for those to be counted by the research assessment exercise here. If that's the case and you actually have a preprint paper sat in a repository, you can do a lot of what you can use Data2Paper effectively to submit that preprint paper into a repository with really relatively little changes of functionality. Again, you can leverage a lot of ORCID to do that. You don't have the DataCite DOI, but you have a lot of the information that's ORCID, and a lot of repositories are well enough structured that we could do things with that metadata. So there are potential interesting workflows happening there. Right, I'm now going to switch to my browser and give you a quick show of the stuff in action. Bear with me a second. Okay, this is a demo, so this is actually basically a screenshot of a test version of Oxford University's Research Archive, which stores actually both papers and data in a single repository. Or that's what you see as far as the outside world is concerned, if you don't worry about the mechanics that sits underneath. But essentially there's a single place at Oxford to come for research outputs, whether it's data, publications, whatever. But anyway, essentially the button just looks like a button here, which you would press, and it will then take you into the Data2Paper application. Now, if I click here, that should take me into Data2Paper. Right, this shows me as already being logged in, and I'm actually logged in as our developer, Anusha, if you can see up here. And if you come to log in, you have the option of logging in either with a Data2Paper account or using your ORCID account. Because Data2Paper leverages ORCID, we expect the vast majority of people to log in using their ORCID account. And in fact, because ORCID actually is starting to link into an increasing number of national identity federations, in a lot of cases, if you are logged on to your repository, which you need to be in order to press the button, because the repository needs to know you're the author of that paper, then in a lot of cases, if you're using your national single sign-on to actually log on to the repository, then you'll already be signed on to Data2Paper as well through the Identity Federation. So coming into Data2Paper, then you can see basically your Data2Paper dashboard, but also you have a list of journals, which I'm going to click on, and you can link in there. And you can see we've got 4 journals we have details to, from F1000 Elsevier, because those are the people we're talking to. And this would effectively be how you select the journal, the pop-up list you would see when you select the journal you wish to publish with. So if I choose F1000 Research, which is one of the journals, we have some information that we have pulled from F1000 Research in order to configure the connection from the Data2Paper cloud application to the publisher's workflow system. So in here, we've got the home page of the journal, the email, brief description, contact, all of that stuff. But more interestingly, down here, what we have is the template for the paper you wish to publish. We have publication notes, and then down here, the things that really Data2Paper can't do, which are the licenses that that publisher supports, and the submission declaration. And then down here, which you don't need to worry about, is how we actually connect to F1000. So that's what a journal configuration typically looks like. So if we come back here, we can then see My Data Papers. And down here, we've actually got, here we go, press the button. This is actually the data set that I've submitted. There's a previous one that I was demoing earlier, but this is the actual data set that I'm using that is going to underlie the paper that I wish to make. So if you can see that here it's new, I haven't done anything other than press the button on the repository. So if I then click on that item, I can see the record that it's actually got from the repository via DataCite. This tells you we've got title, creators, subject, link back to the data paper using DataCite. It's new, it's in Oxford University Research Archive. We've got the time it came up. Now, there's always a chance that the title and the details of the data set itself are not exactly the same as, say, the authorship or the title of the data paper you're going to publish. So you can go in there and edit all those details if you want. You can add an abstract if you want. Not going to do anything particularly there. Now you can come in here and say, okay, where am I publishing it? At the moment I haven't selected anything, so there's nothing to display there, so I can now choose which journal I'd like to publish with. I'll go for F1000 Research and add that to the data paper. And you'll now see, if I come in here, that the journal information has been pulled through from the journal template. And I can then download that template if I wish to, and then use that to actually edit my paper if I haven't already done that. So at any point you can just exit from this system, go away and work on the paper once you've downloaded the template, and then come back to it if you want. If you come down here and look at the files section, then there's some metadata already in the system, and it says, okay, you haven't got any files yet, but in case you're interested, here are the guidelines and here's the template file. So you can pull down the template file if you want and save that. And sometimes, depending on the nature of the template, we're looking at actually pre-filling the template with some data from the data set. This has to be done, or this has to be customized for each journal, so we haven't done that yet, but that's the idea we're going to do. And now I've pulled that doc thing, I can open it in Google Docs. And then I've effectively got the paper template here. I can start to put my bits and pieces in. Actually, an earlier version of the system, we actually had this working, I thought, for F1000, so I'll have to go and check with our developer. Having done that, if I pull that down as a Word file, save that file. Okay, I can then do some work on that paper, have some bits and pieces. Put in anything else I want. Where am I? Okay, so I can now add files to Data2Paper, assuming I've written my paper. And the one thing you can do is not only can you add the actual core of the paper itself, but sometimes you're going to need to add some supplementary files to that. So sometimes you'll have your figures separately. Sometimes you may have odd bits and pieces besides just the main data set you're talking about. So you can actually start to add those in there. So I'm going to add the data paper, select some files, and let's see what I got. Anyway, some notes from some research information management. Okay. So having selected the files, I can start uploading those, and that's now been added to Data2Paper. And if I come back to files, you can now see that that file has been added, and that's the actual data paper. And you can add further figures and other things into there. So essentially, that's your paper now in the system, and it has a chunk of metadata from DOIs and DataCite and ORCID. So now you come in here, you can see that there are licenses and declarations already that are required by the journal. You can add some things if you want, further restrictions if you're so inclined. Most people are not so worried by that. But you then have then you're at the case of, okay, I'd like to submit the thing, and it says, okay, you have to actually choose a license and a declaration statement. So if you come back here and say, okay, there is only one there, and I agree to all of the things that are there. Oops, sorry. So I'll actually choose the single licenses there are there. Probably we can shortcut that in the case of a journal where everything's simplified. But we can now say, okay, I've chosen these and I've agreed to them. So I've ticked those and I've agreed to it. So then I can hit submit and it says, okay, you've done everything. In it goes. And that has now been submitted to the journal, in this case F1000 Research. And if I had them here, they could actually log into their own workflow system, which is not public, it's their internal editorial system, but you could actually see that that document is sitting in their inbound queue. And I need to remind them that this is actually just a bogus test deposit that I've made to them. And that's essentially it. So that is the submission of a data paper using Data2Paper. If you've got the text there, that is the entirety of the submission process. You don't have to deal with the publisher's submission system. Most of the metadata is handled for you. You've got to tick a few boxes, and that's effectively the job done. So, as I said, we're doing some more revisions. We're still working on the code here and there, but later this year, when we actually start to set the pilot service up, we're looking for communities who can say, okay, we have a group of repositories here, we have a group of journals here, so there's a good flow between these two. That's a nice, easy, sort of well-contained environment to actually do some serious testing of this and start to refine the workflow that we're demonstrating here. So that's kind of why we're talking to you, looking for some help to actually develop this into a standalone service. I would call it a product, but we're not aiming to make any money out of it or anything like that. It's designed to be a service that makes the whole process a lot more fluid. And from my point of view, working for university, it's a service that I would like to offer from the research archive when we have a critical mass of journals on board. And that's about it from my demonstration. So thank you very much. Now what I'd like to do is sort of throw it open, and hopefully we can answer any questions you may have about that, what I've just shown you. And Fiona hopefully will as well.
Well, thanks for sharing the service with us, Neil. Does anyone have any questions?
Actually, it's Fiona here. Oh, sorry, go on then. Sorry.
I'm sorry, this is Bruce. I was just wondering, what is the process of getting more journals involved?
Really, there aren't that many data journals in existence at the moment. So, as I said, we're looking for communities which say we publish in these particular journals, and then at the moment, we're resource limited. We will then go and work with those particular journals. We don't have the resources at the moment, although we're looking for, hopefully we'll have some funding soon, to actually pull all the data journals. So we want an interested community who can tell us who they publish with, and then those are the people we'll go and talk to and target.
I was going to say, we had a chat with the Deep Carbon Observatory community over the last sort of week or two, and asked them what some of the journals were that they were potentially interested in, and they said scientific data, which is a Springer Nature journal, Earth System Science Data, which is Copernicus, or Geoscience Data, which is Wiley, and those are all, if you like, pure data journals. I mean, I know that there are a number of primary research primary research journals which do also take data papers, and Data Science Journal, for instance, is one that we've also spoken to, which would potentially support the template. But obviously, we want to make sure that we're if you like, approaching publishers with certain amount of knowledge of the potential communities that are out there that might want to use the system. So I don't know, what do the ESIP community researchers think about that sort of list? I mean, for instance, I was wondering about one of the AGU journals, perhaps, if that would be something that people were would like us to try and investigate? I have the sense that everyone's talking at once, but you've all got your mutes on, haven't you?
Yeah, please do unmute yourself, Gavin. Well, Fiona and Neil, I do have a question. You have this system set up so that you create a template for what the publisher needs, and then inform that template from ORCID or DataCite. Once you've started to reach more of a critical mass, would publishers be able to use that basic template to tell you what they would need?
Yes, I mean, effectively the template I showed you came from F1000 research. So some publishers actually have template documents, which we could push data into and then use as a basis for a paper. Other publishers don't, which is interesting. But for example, I believe, let me just go back to go home here. I believe actually one of the Elsevier ones, I think possibly, is it data in brief? I can't remember. No, that's got a reasonable template. One of them doesn't actually have really much of a template at all, and it's actually down to, it's much less a publisher, it's down to an individual journal, whether they actually have a template document at all. Now, what we could say is, if you were to have a template for your journal, then we could pre-fill it. But for something like F1000, the template already exists, and it's relatively easy for us to modify that. You can see effectively the header of the template is a set of fields with boxes that need to be filled in. When you're configuring a journal, provided their template's reasonably stable, you can actually just say, okay, it's a Word file. Let's put some macros in to actually fill it in from the metadata. When we originally started, a little bit of history, JISC was certainly looking at a journal data policy registry, where we'd actually potentially have links to templates and things like that, and also machine readable licenses and terms and conditions. That project didn't really take off simply because there wasn't enough machine readable material out there. Lots of things were still texty, Word documents, and all sorts of a mess of things. So effectively what we're having to do is construct a limited data journal registry of our own, which is effectively the configuration of Data2Paper. In time, I think, as machine readability improves, that process will actually get simpler.
Okay. Now, if one of those publishers changed things and didn't let you know, would that just crash your system?
We wouldn't crash it. They would effectively get an obsolete submission, and my hope is they will get back to us and say you haven't used a new template. Now, if they were to...
Go for it.
Sorry. But yes, we do have to work with the publisher to keep track of that.
Okay. What about like the journal? Some of the tweets that you had up there had mentioned the file size limitations or type limitations. When you are going through the Data2Paper submission process and you get to select the files off of your computer, are there messages that'll say, hey, great that you want to submit this, but put it in a PDF format or something like that?
Well, no, we don't enforce that because, as I said, a lot of the submission guidelines are actually wordy, so we can only do so much as far as ensuring that the submission we've got works. What What we can do is we can get an error message back saying, you know, your submission failed for the following reasons. Generally, the issue is file size. And actually, based on those tweets, the issue is actually your data file size. So by having this workflow where your data is already sat in a repository, and the only thing we're transferring is the link rather than the data set itself, we actually hope to avoid that. That's one of the things we're trying to avoid with Data2Paper, is people trying to submit their data. The problem is people trying to submit their data set along with the paper.
Oh, I see.
Hello, Sean. This is Steve Worley. I have a question for the presenters. First, thank you, Neil and Fiona, for this great presentation. I think this is an outstanding step forward. My question goes to the journals and the review process. I mean, once you submit something, there's always a back and forth with reviewers.
Yes.
Automatically put you back into their submission system, or do you have ideas on how that might be coped with? Thank you.
Yeah, we're not aiming to replace the review system because that can vary very, very widely. For example, F1000 just conducts open peer review, so that once you've submitted something to them, effectively that's done, unless there's something really heinously wrong with what you submitted, and it's reviewed in an open fashion. For other journals, effectively, no, you will still be interacting with whatever their peer review process is until the point of publication. All we are trying to do is effectively automate that first step. The hope is subsequent interactions with their peer review system, because all the metadata has been sorted out, you shouldn't at least have any issues in that area, and you can actually concentrate on getting the paper right as opposed to correcting your submission.
Okay, thank you very much.
Actually, there was another question. Oh, sorry, go on.
Go ahead, Fiona. No, never mind.
Okay. I'd like to hear whoever's question that was in a second. But another question that we had, I guess, for the ESIP community was about the way that your repositories are organised. If you frequently do use ORCIDs, for instance, and DOIs, and if you like have sort of standard interfaces, in the sense if somebody do the researchers typically use a number of repositories within the ESIP network, or how does that work?
Fiona, this is Ted Haberman.
Okay.
You know, in general, the ESIP community is made up of you know, has members from many other organizations, and yeah, you know, those include certainly NASA, NOAA, and the USGS, which are the primary sponsors of ESIP, and then and many others. So the ESIP community itself doesn't really have, I mean, you know, ESIP doesn't own, you know, whatever that means, quote unquote, own any data repositories. It supports communication between those agencies and others in the United States that have repositories, and might sort of function as a clearinghouse for best practices for those repositories, but that hasn't actually happened to my knowledge, and so the repository characteristics are much more controlled by the agencies rather than by ESIP. Does that make sense? Yeah,
it does. It's something I felt that I should have known better already, but I appreciate your clearing that. So a question like ORCID, for instance, it was something that one would need to check with the individual organizations.
Right. As far as I know, just, you know, with just offhand, there are no, as far as I know, in the U.S. federal agencies, there are no metadata or repository standards that are being used that include the use of identifiers for people or organizations. as of yet. Because I think the only place that would happen, it would happen on landing pages, I guess. But I'm not sure who's on the meeting right now, but there may be people that could correct me if I'm wrong. But as far as I know, I don't remember any discussions with U.S. agencies currently that are supporting those kinds of identifiers. DOI is certainly, there's a lot of folks in. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. I was going to say, I'm aware that the NSF, certainly if you have an ORCID profile, you can fast track submissions.
You can fast track
Submissions.
Oh, submissions, but
yeah, funding.
NSF, doesn't really have a data. I mean, there are a number of data archives that are supported by NSF, and perhaps ILIDE might be the most likely of those. ILIDE at Columbia might be the most likely to use ORCIDs, just because Kirsten Leonard is very interested in general in identifiers of all kinds. NCAR, and maybe Steve knows, NCAR and UCAR are also, what's the group that meets the CBA, the
Data Stewardship Engineering Team.
No, but the ESIP, the EarthCube group that has been meeting at ESIP. Council of Data Facilities, right, is the group of NSF data facilities. Steve, do you know, are you guys at NCAR doing anything with ORCIDs or any other DCEP member?
We don't really have a what can I say, initiative underway to get more and more ORCID IDs on our data sets, but it's certainly something we should think about doing in the future. I mean, we've made a push toward the DOI part, but this is another enhancement that should be done, but we have not done it at this point.
Yeah.
I mean, the other thing to note that ORCIDs certainly, or person identifiers of some sort, ISNI, whatever, are part of certainly the DataCite v4 specification. So if you are doing DataCite DIs, ORCIDs effectively sort of are starting to come in the package.
Right, yeah, and of the well-known metadata dialects, currently I believe DataCite is the only one that includes identifiers for people.
Yeah.
It is actually being added to ISO 19115, and so that will probably happen this summer. So the ability to include those identifiers for people and organizations will exist in ISO, mostly because we were able to follow the lead of DataCite in introducing those identifiers for those kinds of things. But in terms of the unified metadata model, which is used by NASA, or certainly FGDC, which is still used quite a bit in USGS, and ISO 19115, say -2, and GCMD. GCMD, no, I don't think so. That would be the UMM. It just doesn't. That concept has not penetrated those dialects as of yet.
Okay, so it sounds like, from our point of view, we're probably a little bit early to the game. And probably in terms of being able to deliver these functions to you, we need to be sort of, I guess, selective and watch the repositories and see where they're going. Would that be a reasonable assessment?
This is Lindsay Powers at USGS. Hi, everybody. maybe Leslie, she can comment on this as well, but there is some movement within USGS to promote ORCIDs during the scientific data publication process that's really being ramped up internally within USGS now.
I guess one potential question I could ask is, would being able to do something like this actually be a useful way of illustrating the benefits of ORCIDs?
Yeah, I think so. You know, one of the things that we're trying to do, I think, in this meeting is to think about sessions that the documentation cluster might do. Did we already do that?
So we're going to be handling that offline.
Oh, well, you know, it might be an interesting presentation to do at the summer meeting.
On ORCID?
Either in some, you know, or data papers or something that would bring in, you know, this as the demo of what you can do if you're using identifiers for people or organizations. I mean, that would be an opportunity to take this, you know, this demonstration to a broader audience within ESIP, maybe. Yeah.
This is Matt Marinick from NCAR as well. I would agree that I think having these kinds of services that use ORCIDs is potentially really helpful to getting people interested in ORCIDs. So, I think, you know, we can talk about ORCIDs, but until there are applications that show some practical use of it, I think it's going to be slow. And I've had an ORCID myself for probably a couple of years now, and aside from using it in some situations as a login credential, I've probably actually entered it into something maybe 3 times, and that's always been, I think, journal submissions that ask for it. And now maybe there's other places I could have been putting it that I, you know, just didn't do for whatever reason, but having an ORCID doesn't itself do a whole lot for you until there are applications that use that. And so I think this is a good example of one that could potentially push some interesting services for people to get them interested in that.
Okay, that's something that's, you know, certainly interesting for us, and if you think this would help your case or something like that, then yeah, if you can see some way, then we'd be happy to, I suppose, pitch in or whatever.
Yeah, I think there's an emerging movement anyway, isn't there, among a lot of the sort of earth sciences, particularly people more along the informatics end around persistent identifiers. And I know that several people on the call, as well as I, have been involved with some of those discussions and sessions. That just building the persistent identifiers and the good links in between them is, you know, ultimately should become powerful. But in the meantime, it's a case of bringing the majority of researchers to a point where it can become useful to them. I think, I don't know if I'm right or not in thinking it, but I'm sure I've read somewhere that the AGU is also thinking about it, or has actually mandated that needs to that's at least the corresponding author for their papers needs an ORCID as well. So
I mean, the AGU is sort of an interesting case, right? Because it's a major publisher, but it also deals with membership. You know, like, so Elsevier is a major publisher, but they don't have members. So
yeah.
So AGU sort of straddling two different modalities, sort of, for individuals and individual identifiers.
Yeah.
It's also a submission system that nobody I've ever encountered enjoys using.
Okay.
Yeah,
that's true.
well, yeah, but and all of us actually have AGU, right? I mean, everybody that's a member of AGU has, you know, whatever, an 8-digit number, which is your member ID. So it'll be interesting to see if that got changed to an ORCID. That would be significant. Yeah. Since there's 30,000 some AGU members.
Right. Yeah. Definitely get ORCID a little bit of a footprint. So Neil, I have one more question. I was curious to know if you're able to pull any information from other metadata dialects or standards. You mentioned that you were able to get the majority of the information needed from DataCite metadata, but a lot of people in these communities will be using ISO or FGDC. Are there any plans to read other dialects for ingest purposes?
Quite possibly. It's really down to sort of the number of people using those dialects and how much traffic we can expect. Because one of the other options is actually, if we're dealing with sort of community metadata standards, to actually, there's no reason why the submission process can't actually include, you know, if it's just a chunk of XML or something like that, which it frequently is, we could actually just pass that wholesale through between the repository and the journal as effectively a supplementary file. With metadata, you're not likely to hit the size limits or the other limitations. And if it's a community-defined one, then the chances are both the journal and the repository understand that metadata format. So effectively, there are two approaches. One is we can support it by actually processing the metadata within Data2Paper, but in a lot of cases, if there is specialist information there, it may make sense to actually pass that through rather than just extracting what we need, and that way the journal gets a lot more information that we don't actually care about for this particular workflow.
Right. Okay.
So to some extent, you know, we would aim to be community driven on that.
Gotcha.
This is why sort of getting groups of people and groups of journals who have a strong workflow are interesting people to talk to from our point of view.
So Bruce is mentioning in the chat that there may already be some cluster looking to do a session on persistent identifiers. It might be that we could do a joint session with them if we've got some interest on talking on those ideas. Bruce, do you know which cluster that is?
Yeah, let me get back to you on that. We could put the
yeah,
question.
I mean, I can look through the submissions too, but
right. It could be a question, since this is pretty important to put up on the Slack channel for the collab leads and just see how many clusters want to get involved in this one.
I mean, this is being recorded, I believe, so we could easily, you know, circulate that at them and say, are you interested in knowing more? Does this fit in with what you're trying to do?
Yeah, I'll definitely find those leads and make sure that they see the link to the recording. Well, I'm going to put out one last call for questions for our presenters. So if you have anything that you weren't sure on or anything that you wanted to add, now's your chance to do that. All right, well, thank you very much, Neil and Fiona, for coming today and sharing your work with us. I'm sure that we will have more opportunities to work together. It looks like there are some interesting directions that that this work could go in that would definitely benefit documentation cluster members and the communities that they serve. So thank you for coming today.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks for the opportunity.
I just want to say quickly, I'm going to be at EGU in about a month, so if there's anybody on this call or otherwise in our ESIP who'd like to have a chat then, that would be great. Just get in touch.
Yeah, I will say that, you know, if you want to contact Fiona or Neil, please do feel free. There are opportunities for your unique workflow needs to get some help. So definitely reach out to them at any of the conferences that have been mentioned in the emails. And also, if anyone is local to Boulder tonight, we're going to be meeting from 5 to 7 at Southern Sun for a happy hour where we'll discuss this presentation as well as other BESIG future plans. So thank you for all joining us today, and I hope you have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Fiona. Thanks, Neil.
Bye.
So long.